Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap Surveys and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we're going to be looking at how skip logic and survey branching can help you gain the data you need from your project. It should take about 15 minutes and a recording of it will be emailed to you in the coming days. I should add at this stage that we are discussing skip logic and survey branching today, and I may end up saying routing at some point today as well, as that's what we call it in Snap. But it's all the same thing and it all relates to guiding your participants around the surveys and forms. A few benefits to making use of skip logic and survey branching. More than anything, it's a way of guiding participants from start to finish, avoiding them going off on a tangent. In doing so, you can personalise the experience for them based upon their answers given. Because they are being guided, they will avoid answering unnecessary questions, making the process that much quicker for them. With that, there's less annoyance and frustration at answering questions which don't seem relevant to them. That's going to make them more likely to actually get to the end and press submit, which means more data heading your way. And if you haven't annoyed them too much and you are lucky, they may well be willing to participate again in the future. Another potential benefit, depending upon your project, will be the end data pot. Often when looking at client surveys, I've come across multiple versions of a survey or form where a survey's been cloned and then tweaked as they need different participants to see slightly different things. This then means that a master survey would need to be created for the data to be analysed together. By having one larger routed survey, the analysis stage gets that bit easier. It also means that you're dealing in one link for your questionnaire or form rather than having to send out multiple links for different forms. It may well be that you do end up producing a number of different seeded links which are based upon the original link. That way you can take the participant down the correct route without asking them to decide which route they're going to take. So again, making the end product more efficient and also less prone to mistakes as you're deciding on the route for them. Okay, let's take you into some examples of how skip logic and survey branching can be used to enhance your data collection. Let's begin with a very simple example that uses 3 different types of skip logic just to make sure that we all understand the basic functionality in action. This example does contain a couple of questions at the beginning just to make it a little bit more realistic, so I'll just go ahead and answer those ones. And then if I say that I am currently in education, I can specify which school group we're in, as well as give some further thoughts. If I change the education question to no, I'm then instead asked about my employment status. Now, in my example today, the extra questions are popping up and disappearing in sort of front of our eyes. You may well feel it works better by adding a page break in between. And I guess more than anything, that's dependent on whether it's an issue that a participant sees a future question appearing and then disappearing. But it's all our personal choice. But from a testing perspective, it certainly is quite handy having it all on the one page just to check that you have things set up correctly. I'll leave it on the no for the education question to begin with. And we then have a multiple response question where we can specify what my employment status is, including the option for other with some additional please specify next to it. I've also got an additional pop-up question coming if I select director or office holder. So at its simplest, you can see that skip logic is just about making sure that participants have access to the questions that they need to see and skip over any content that isn't relevant to them. And with my additional information questions appearing alongside the original checkbox, the focus remains on that answer rather than sort of having to go further down the page to give additional information. Okay, let's have a look at some slightly more interesting uses of survey branching. First up, I have a form which is using a variety of pop-up messages to give information and sometimes warn the participant of issues with the data that's been input. Initially, it's taking the form of an on-site audit, which perhaps includes some face-to-face interviewing. I'll state that I haven't seen evidence of the well-known section 875 of Article A42, and that the money printing machine has been cleaned on a monthly basis, and that there's 3 members of staff in the front foyer. At the end of this very short audit, I'm then presented with a number of things which have been flagged up, and in my case, it's all 3 things have been flagged. But if I go back and amend my data to say that actually there were 5 members of staff in the foyer, and I have seen evidence of section 875, and then press next, you can see 2 of the warning messages have disappeared and we're just left with the 1 remaining message. Likewise, if I go back and decide that actually the money printing machine was cleaned on a weekly basis, then we're left with a message saying we're pleased to confirm that there's no issues of concern. As mentioned, this could work really well if you are perhaps sitting down with a colleague or client, answering questions along the way, and then you have a final review section at the end with the form acting as a knowledge base. It actually means that the person asking the question doesn't really need to have an in-depth knowledge of right and wrong, as the form is providing that information at the end. Next, I want to check that the date being answered tallies with another date. It could be that it's a follow-up survey which should only be completed so many days after an event has taken place, or checking arrival versus departure date, etc. In my example today, I'm taking the scenario that a complaint letter has been filed, but someone's then filling out a follow-up complaint form. But users should wait at least 4 days before the first form is completed and then the follow-up form is sent. So I will initially state that my first report was raised on, well, in fact, I'm going to say tomorrow. Now, obviously that's not possible, so I have a system message telling me that I can't add a date in the future. So if I change it to yesterday, we then have a form message stating that this form can only be used if the initial complaint was at least 4 days ago. If I try and move on regardless, I get a system message telling me I'm not able to do that. So this works a little differently to the audit style informational message that we saw before, where we could simply press next to move on regardless of the pop-up. If I go back and add a date further back, the pop-up message is removed and then I can continue. This example ends with a quiz with either a "that's not quite right, try again," or a correct message. Now, this message is appearing instantly on the page, whereas in the next example, the message will appear on the following page. So if I give some options in here and press next, you can see that's not quite right. Press back to try again. So really that's personal choice again, whether that message appears straight away or on the next page. If I go back and change my answers, we then have a "that's correct" message. And this time I've actually included a video, which is just a YouTube embedded link. Sticking with the idea of form filling, next I have an example form which I'm asking for the input on future development ideas. I just work my way through the form, answering the questions along the way. Now, the first question is asking me if I have any ideas of how to win new business. Now, I may not have any ideas, so I can effectively opt out of that section. A similar set of questions is then asking about ideas to retain existing customers. Again, I might not have any ideas, so I can effectively opt out. And then I'm just faced with a general comments and a thank you message. But let's go back and start again. So this time for the new customers, I'm going to start inputting some data. Now, as I start inputting data, the option to say I have no ideas disappears. And if I start adding some additional options, extra options are appearing. If I press next, I'm then asked to choose which of those ideas do I think form the top 3. And you can see I've got 4 ideas, but I'm only allowed to choose the top 3. So the last idea won't let me drag it across, but I can change the order. Equally, I can drag some back and put a different option wherever I like. For my existing customers, I'm just going to add 1 option today. Again, the option to say I've got no idea disappears. And this time, because I've only chosen 1 option, I'm not being asked to rank them top to bottom because obviously there's only 1 option to rank in the first place. So some nice functional survey branching which will ensure that I'm only seeing the bare minimum that we need to see and not being cluttered with irrelevant content. Just a couple of final examples to show you. Here I have an example where you may need to collect some information about something, but some respondents may well have just one set of information to give you. Others may have multiple sets. So first off is the option of effectively how many sets of information do I need to give you. So if I say I just need to give you one set, I'll just get one set of questions popping up. If I say I have 3 members in my household, I get effectively 3 sets of information popping up. We then have a request for further feedback if there's any negative response to certain questions within this grid question. So I'll say that I'm fairly satisfied and very satisfied. For the tidiness though, I'm going to say that I was very dissatisfied. For the attitude, I'll say neither. And for the overall quality, I'll say I'm fairly dissatisfied. So you can see we get some additional questions popping up and this reminding you what you actually said about the tidiness. So fairly satisfied and very dissatisfied. And then finally, we have a filter question. So I'm going to select a couple of options. And effectively, that's then going to ask me for feedback on those options. So it's ensuring that I'm only asked to feedback on the areas which are relevant to me, and that avoids the dreaded need to have the not applicable option down the side. For my final example today, I'm using some in-survey calculations to decide which route a participant will take. So the journey is very much personalised to that individual answers given at any one moment. So first of all, we have 2 quantity response questions, which I've actually set up to display as slider controls. So you can actually type in there as well, but today I'm going to slide. And you can see once I hit a particular target, and the target in my case is 6, we get this additional pop-up at the bottom. And as I'm making my group size bigger and smaller, you can see there's some calculations taking place to add up the number, but also to work out what that percentage discount might be. So again, as I decrease my numbers, the percentage discount decreases. As I increase my numbers, it increases. We then have a set of questions that are being displayed based on the moment in time that I clicked a link. So we've actually got 4 sets of questions in the background, but I've set it up to only ever display one set. Now, it's actually based on the number of seconds within a particular minute, with set 1 appearing if I click the link within the first 15 seconds of a minute, set 2 appearing if I click the link within 15 to 30 seconds, and then so on for set 3 and 4. Now, at the moment, I have a question about the water station. If I was to press the restart button, and if I get lucky, we now have the questions about the medical tent. We do have a similar feature called randomize, but that's about displaying a set of questions in a random order, whereas today I'm using the time to specify when a particular set of question will be used. Moving on to my final page, you may have a scenario where you wish to add up the number of answered questions or the number of correct answers to a set of questions. Now, in my rather crude example today, I've allocated some points based upon which answers are given. So for this first question, anytime anyone says every day, they're going to receive a point. So effectively, I've got 2 points now because I've selected every day twice. If I jump to the very last question, I've actually specified it's on answer 2. So you can see we've actually got a message at the bottom. I've only got 2 points at the moment. But when I choose the second answer, I get 3 points. And then for the middle section, I've got a set of sort of magic words, if you like. So if all 3 words are input correctly, you can see I've added an extra 3 points. The message has also changed. I've got a yellow background or orange background. And if I go ahead and get my bonus point, we get a different message again popping up. Now, realistically, you'd probably want to add a page break between the questions and the messages at the bottom. And today, in this example, I've included a back and a restart button. Again, if this was a sort of a test or quiz, realistically, you'd remove the back button and also the restart button as well. But certainly when you're testing it, and today it gave me a chance to jump back and pretend that I was starting the survey again, so the restart button was quite useful. Okay, that's everything I had planned to show today. Hopefully it's given you some ideas around making your forms more efficient and less frustrating for the end user. A parting thought or two: when setting up your skip logic and survey branching, you do need to consider the unusual answers that a respondent might give, making sure you've allowed for all the different pathways that a participant might follow. With that in mind, think about the question text and header text that's used in follow-up questions. So does it work if they come from route A, but also if they've come from route E? Do we need to consider perhaps different messages, or perhaps just making that message less specific? And the best way to do that is really to try and get into the mindset of different participants and role play the situation. We will be emailing out a recording of today's webinar in the coming days, and we'll be running further webinars each week, with the next one being based around boosting completion rates through the use of engaging question styles. More information about that will be emailed over shortly. Thank you for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.